Literally 15 seconds after the sun entered Aries on March 20th last year in 2022, I posted on what used to be called Twitter that the state of New York would come down on Donald John Trump and gave the date of November 20th, 2023. Well, Letitia James, Attorney General of New York State, started proceedings against Trump, his sons, and his daughter on September 21st, 2022. That could be considered coming down on Trump and would be over a year before my public prediction. Between March 20th and September 21st, the January 6th committee met, with Cassidy Hutchinson giving testimony that both took out the first chink in Donald Trump's armor that he's been both losing and reinforcing ever since. The Time Lord I've modified and used, the Vimshotri Dasha, the most used Time Lord in India, and probably the world, has the specific purpose of showing the tranquility or turmoil of the mind of the subject being studied. In India, in Jyotish, the moon stands for the mind. This seems weird because Western astrology thinks of Mercury as being the significator of the mental faculties. Both studies aren't contradicting each other. Mercury stands in for the discriminating mind, the mind as it moves. The moon stands in for, again, the calmness or turmoil of the mind. They both use the same label, the mind, for two different faculties of human beings. The Vimshotri Dasha uses the natal position of the moon as a starting point to gauge how tranquil or enturmoiled the native's life will be over time. Trying to predict and describe exact events in a person's life is not easy. Through March 20, 2022 to now, the description I've stuck to most consistently is, on November 20th, 2023, will start the period in Donald John Trump's life where he will have the most mental turmoil he will ever have as an adult. As I'm writing this on September 28th, Judge Arthur Engoron ruled in a civil lawsuit brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, found that Trump and his company deceived banks, insurers, and others by massively overvaluing his assets and exaggerating his net worth on paperwork used in making deals and securing loans. Judge Engoron has revoked the licenses for Trump to do business in New York State, and the trial starting on October 2nd will consist of how much damages Trump must pay. Engoron has already determined that he has committed fraud. The issue now is whether he has to pay $250 million in damages or more than that. Since this is about rethinking and revising Time Lords, I'd better show the nativity for Mr. Trump and his Time Lord periods, showing why I made the predictions I did. We have two significant problems when dealing with Donald Trump when we use Time Lords. Problem number one: which ascendant to use? The vast majority of the astrological world takes the birth time of 10:54 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and sees the fixed star Regulus partile with the ascending degree, and that's taken as conclusive. My late friend Robert Schmidt was the founder of Project Hindsight, and the very last piece of astrological lore he had to impart to the community was to inspect the nativity of Donald Trump and decide that a few seconds of time should be added to the birth time that changed the chart from late Leo rising to early Virgo rising. He averred that one need not even change the actual recorded birth time. As it turns out, using my own software based on the Swiss ephemeris, that all one need do is add between 13 and 29 seconds to the birth time to gain a Virgo ascendant while preserving the 10:54 official birth time. A birth time of 10:54 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time yields an ascendant of 29 Leo 57:31. A birth time of 10:54 and 13 seconds yields an ascendant of 0 Virgo 0:05. To quote his widow, Ellen Black, quoting him, with late Leo rising, Trump would have the eminence of a plumber. 4 of his classical planets would be in cadent houses: Jupiter in the 3rd, Venus, Saturn, and Mercury in the 12th. If you move the ascendant to Virgo, those planets move to succedent houses: Jupiter in the 2nd, Venus, Saturn, and Mercury in the 11th, and his natal sun moves to the 10th. Problem number 2. Donald Trump was born during a lunar eclipse. Although Vimshotri Dasha initiates the life from the position of the moon, the Jyotish tradition says that an eclipsed moon is not strong enough to serve as a significator for the Time Lord. In such cases, you default to the position of the ascendant to start the Time Lord rolling. I had trepidations about timing the life of Trump from the ascendant as a starting point, but my worries seem to have been proven unnecessary. We have a problem number 3 using Vimshotri Dasha, which has nothing to do specifically with Donald Trump and constitutes a universal misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that, like the issue with Leo rising for Trump, affects anyone using Vimshotri to predict. Astrologer and YouTube channel Vic Dikara, who reads Sanskrit, concludes that while the moon mansions used in Jyotish, the nakshatras, are definitely sidereal, the 12-sign chart used in Jyotish is supposed to be tropical. As most astrologers know, this is not how the Jyotishis from India or anywhere else in the world tend to do things. On the basis of my own investigations and experiments, I find Jyotish using the tropical zodiac to work more consistently than any of the various sidereal zodiacs. With those exceptions laid before you, exceptions, I admit, to the vast majority of astrological practices, both East and West, I can now show you why I predicted what I predicted and indicate why the Vimshotri Dasha Time Lord gives what happens to Trump and what will happen to him in the very near future. The single most important feature in Donald Trump's natal chart is that he was born during a lunar eclipse. Even though I'm not using Vimshotri Dasha, starting from the position of the moon when he was born, Vimshotri still tells the astrologer when the subject's mind is tranquil and when it's in turmoil. As being eclipsed constitutes a sort of injury to the native's moon, we can expect the moon major period of the Vimshotri Dasha to be a period of time when Donald Trump will not be peaceful of mind. He can expect, sadly, to suffer. Trump's moon major period, his moon Mahadasha, began on October 4th, 2016, a month before the election. Here we must ask a question. Since Trump got elected President of the United States 1 month after Moon Dasha starts, did he suffer when he got elected? I admit I regard as accurate the reporting of Michael Wolff, author of Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House, that Donald John Trump ran for president in 2016 with no intention of winning. He ran to increase the value of his brand, intending to become a media mogul. He already had a strategy to use when he lost. The election was stolen. I only saw one debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton. In front of the cameras, he repeatedly sniffed and wiped his nose as if he had just done cocaine. I don't think anyone, prior to those debates, ever saw a candidate act so rude and interruptive as Trump did whilst Clinton spoke. This explains to me why he cruelly mocked the disabled fellow. He was trying to guarantee that he would lose. My colleague and friend, Dale Nelson, watched election night. I admit I did not. According to Dale, cameras focused on Trump showed someone walking around in a daze. I quote Fire and Fury. Shortly after 8 o'clock that evening, when the unexpected trend, Trump might actually win, seemed confirmed, Don Jr. told a friend that his father, or DJT as he called him, looked as if he had seen a ghost. Melania, to whom Donald Trump had made his solemn guarantee that he would lose, was in tears and not of joy. Cast yourself back to the period of time between Election Day and Inauguration Day in January. The nation got out of the news something Donald Trump has zero natural talent for: silence. If he had wanted to win, the celebration would have been deafening. Only after he was inaugurated did he admirably, yes, admirably, pick himself up and face the task of the presidency he didn't want, and began that term by telling the first of his over 30,000 untruths over the next 4 years, that his inauguration had been more heavily attended than any other in history, when very clearly it did not. How does this show up in the moon major period chart? The natal lunar eclipse, all by itself, guarantees a certain amount of mental turmoil in excess of what the native feels usually. Right at the beginning of the moon period, the moon Mahadasha, the transit of the moon itself sets the tone for the entire period, which in this case lasts for 10 years. The transiting moon is at 16 Scorpio 39. This is bad in two ways. Scorpio, being the fallen sign of the moon, is zodiacally the worst place for the moon to be, as Trump's natal moon is at 21 Sagittarius 12. The transiting moon provides no help to the natal moon at all, as any planets in Scorpio and Sagittarius are in aversion. They are totally disconnected. Skipping over to the next big event, what does the chart for the start of the moon major period, Mercury subperiod, tell us? Trump's moon major period, Mercury subperiod, began on June 29, 2022. 18 hours before then, the January 6th committee met and heard the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson. As any good astrologer would do, I tried to look up a birthplace and time for Ms. Hutchinson, and for months I couldn't find any. Later I found 2 birth dates. I suspect that conservatives generally, wanting to avoid being doxxed perhaps, simply don't let their birth information onto the web. Only 2 days ago have other astrologers uncovered a birth date, birthplace, and a tentative birth time for Ms. Hutchinson. But first, let me address Trump's Moon-Mercury Time Lord chart. One of the most invaluable pieces of the original Greek astrology, uncovered by Robert Schmidt, is the doctrine of adherence. The doctrine of adherence was lost to the astrological world until he brought it back. Adherence is a doctrine that goes along with either planetary aspects or conjunctions and are strictly degree-based. A transiting planet conjoins or aspects a natal planet if both planets are in the same degree, or in the 3 degrees preceding the transited planet, or in the 3 degrees following the transited planet. What turns an aspect or conjunction into an adherence is when the transiting planet approaches the transited planet, the transiting planet sticks to the transited planet like glue. It adheres to it. If I want to be completely accurate, adherence only truly pertains to conjunctions. Aspects, as opposed to conjunctions, are referred to as coming down on the planet aspected. The Greek word actually refers to a wrestler pinning an opponent. When a transiting planet adheres to the transited planet, it takes up some of its power. The more exact the adherence, the more power gets taken up. The Indian astrologers have this doctrine in a more abbreviated form. If 2 planets are within a degree of each other, the one lower in longitude, the one approaching the other, wins what is called planetary war. The most famous natal example of planetary war is the nativity of Hitler, whose natal Venus loses the war to Mars, and Mars takes up Venus's power. Look closely at the Moon-Mercury chart. Trump's natal sun is at 22 Gemini 55. The transiting Mercury is at 19 Gemini 28. Modern astrology generally thinks that Mercury in its own sign, conjoining the native's natal sun, would be a good thing. With the doctrine of adherence under our belts, we know that sometimes it's not. Transiting Mercury at 19 Gemini 28 adheres to Donald Trump's natal sun, and yes, takes up some of its power. But that's not all that Mercury there is doing, as Mercury at 19 Gemini 28 is in opposition aspect to Trump's natal moon at 21 Sagittarius 12. And since 1928 is lower in longitude than 2112, transiting Mercury is also taking up the power of Trump's natal moon as well. Now I could add in Cassidy Hutchinson. According to the latest findings, Ms. Hutchinson was born on December 12, 1996, in Pennington, New Jersey. The tentative birth time is 5:40 a.m., but we don't need the birth time to make a very salient point. Her natal sun, the primary significator of one's identity, is at 20 Sagittarius 42. Cassidy Hutchinson's sun is a mere 6 minutes of arc away from the south node of the moon in Donald Trump's birth chart at 20 Sagittarius 48. The south node is what causes your natal moon to be eclipsed. Not intending to do any of this at all, Cassidy Hutchinson personally identifies with a planet in Donald Trump's chart that causes his lifelong mental turmoil. Having to testify before the committee did give her personally some cause for mental turmoil as well. And her natal sun adheres to Trump's south node preposterously closely. Her natal sun takes up the power of Trump's south node and uses it for her own ends that align with the January 6th committee. Before June 28, 2028, Donald Trump was riding high. In spite of the failed insurrection attempt of January 6, 2021, it seemed like nothing was going to bring him down, while she would be just as virtuous and honorable if she were as homely as a Victorian scullery maid. The beautiful Ms. Hutchinson started Trump down the road to fundamentally increased turmoil, and I don't think anyone can deny the timing or that fact. Now we come to the prediction I uploaded to Twitter, March of last year. General theory in Jyotish says that if the native was born during a lunar eclipse, this is when the mental turmoil in their life will peak. November 20, 2023 is when Donald Trump begins his moon major period, Ketu secondary period. Ketu is Sanskrit for the south node of the moon. I will be saying Ketu instead of repeating south node of the moon. To explain this next Time Lord period fully, I need to bring up another fundamental technique from Greek astrology found by Robert Schmidt. The idea of testimony. Testimony was a word used countless times in the old Greek astrology texts and never defined explicitly in any of them. It took Schmidt to uncover and deduce that a testimony is when two planets will, over time, perfect the aspect angle between them before either planet leaves the sign they are in. We have current-day Greek astrology scholars who deny the validity of this definition. Since this definition is not explicitly written down in the surviving Greek astrology texts, they conclude that Schmidt was reading between the lines, and they conflate together the words testimony and aspect to mean the same thing. Testimony is defined by Schmidt. Your YouTuber has found incisive in many examinations of charts and will figure in our analysis of the Moon Ketu Time Lord period for Trump. Something that experienced astrologers know is that the nodes of the moon, in general, travel backward. They enter the sign from the 30th degree and exit the sign from the 1st degree, while all of the planets, save the sun and the moon, alternate between traveling forward and backward, retrograde motion, with the Earth as the reference point. The nodes of the moon regularly oscillate between ebbing forward and lurching backward, with the backward motion being the primary one. Why bring this up? Because at the beginning of Trump's Moon Ketu period, Ketu is at 24 Libra 25. As all the planets Ketu makes any connections with will be moving forward, the disruptive effects of Ketu will rake over all those natal and transiting planets that are lower in longitude. Ketu will be making testimonies to those planets. We don't even have to look anywhere but Libra in Donald Trump's chart to see a bunch of, for him, unhappy action. During the Moon Ketu period specifically, transiting Ketu will do to these planets what it does to Trump's natal moon, turn them into agents of mental turmoil. What are the planets and sensitive points we can see? Natally, Trump has Jupiter at 17 Libra 27. There is no question Ketu will do its best to do a number on Trump's assets. But while Jupiter is the only natal planet, albeit a hugely important one, in Libra, other transits and sensitive points need also to be taken into account. Venus transits here at 13 Libra 01. No question, transiting Ketu will testify to transiting Venus. Venus being the ruler of Libra, Ketu will disrupt the workings of Venus right in her own domain. Venus rules in Trump's nativity the second house of personal wealth, the ninth house of authorities that guide the native's actions, and exalts in the seventh house of marriage partners and, to some extent, partners of all sorts. During specifically the period of Moon Ketu, all of these areas of life will have the disruptive action of Ketu, the south node of the moon, hitting them. If the 11th house represents, among other things, money and assets that come because of the profession of the person, the second house represents money and assets that come to the person himself. From November 20, 2023 to June 15, 2024, Ketu, the south node of the moon, will be raking through the house that represents Trump's own money and wealth. Not only will planets be affected during this time, so will some of Trump's natal lots. The lots are what used to be known only to the astrological world as Arabic parts. Parts and lots, from allotments, are actually Greek in origin. If the planets signify things, the lots separate out specific significations of those planets and show where they turn up on Earth. Take the lot of courage, a Mars lot. Mars stands for many, many things: strength, masculinity, divisiveness, anger, warfare, athletics, action, and yes, courage. The list is endless, truly endless. If the amino acids in the body have relevance for every part of human biological life, Mars has signification for roughly 1/7 of everything on Earth. The Mars-based lot of courage shows in the native's life where specifically how the native is brave. If the lot of courage is afflicted, then it shows plainly why the native is cowardly. At 2 Libra 57 lies the lot of accusation. As unhappy as Donald Trump's life may be right now, this suggests unhappily and strongly that the accusations will grow even larger and louder starting November 20th. At 0 Libra 53 lies the lot of the father. The legacy Trump got from his father will be in peril. This has already come true. On September 28, 2023, the state of New York has already said that Trump owes at least $250 million due to tax fraud. The trial starting on October 2nd has specifically to do with bringing in witnesses to determine if the fine should be higher. All of this unhappy action pertains to Trump himself. However, like the chart for the beginning of Moon Mercury, the chart for Moon Ketu shows a specific person steering a bunch of the action, piling the turmoil into Mr. Trump's life. The position of Ketu at the beginning of Moon Ketu is, again, 24 Libra 25, the 25th degree. The natal son of Letitia James, Attorney General of New York State, being born on October 18, 1958, in Brooklyn, New York, is also in the 25th degree. Although I've used the Vimshotri Dasha to track the life of Mr. Trump, I have, from the standpoint of almost all Jyotish practitioners out there, modified how the Time Lord gets calculated. If my prediction about Trump in November 20th of this year comes true, I will give the terms of my calculations. I'll post here how and why my Time Lord calculations differ from what most astrologers do.